Okay, so we've been on a Lenin tip lately. I'm going to get into reading Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. Should revolutionaries work in reactionary trade unions? What this is called. Kind of an interesting subject to cover here. What does Lenin have to say about revolutionaries working in reactionary trade unions? It's it seems like it could be relevant to today's life, for a vast majority of, well, first of all, the United States doesn't have trade unions. Those are gone for some, but nevertheless, are there, reactionary trade unions? Are there reactionaries among workers, right? In general, that's what we're gonna, we could at least look at how it applied to the Bolshevik Revolution. Nothing else, give it some historical weight, some historical context that we can apply to real life. Because if it is historical, then it happened, right? It's real life. It's not a make-believe story. And that is scientific socialism, is when you're studying what happened and you can take everything into account, right? So let's go ahead and look into it. Left-wing communism and infantile disorder. Should revolutionaries work in reactionary trade unions? The lefts, in quotation marks, lefts, I've noticed, like a left-wing quote, every time Vladimir says left, or if he says left-wing, he oftentimes will put it in quotation marks. Like every time, I don't think I've ever seen him not put it in quotation marks. It's almost like a dissatisfactory with is what I get. That's how I feel about the whole left wing, right wing thing, because it's not like it's like a good versus bad. It's not very dialectical materialist. It's a false step. It doesn't need to be there to figure out what's correct and what's incorrect based on reality. So anyway, enough of my stuff. We're supposed to be reading this. Okay. Left-wing communism and infantile disorder. Let's see. The German lefts consider that, as far as they are concerned, the reply to this question is an unqualified negative. The question is, should revolutionaries work in reactionary trade unions? In their opinion, declamations and angry outcries, such as uttered by K. Horner in a particularly solid and particularly stupid manner against, quote, reactionary and counter-revolutionary trade unions, are sufficient proof that it is unnecessary and even inexcusable for revolutionaries and communists to work in yellow, social chauvinist, compromising, and counter-revolutionary trade unions of the Legion type. However firmly the German lefts may be convinced of the revolutionism of such tactics, the latter are in fact fundamentally wrong and contain nothing but empty phrases. To make this clear, I shall begin with our own experience. In keeping with the general plan of the present pamphlet, which is aimed at applying to Western Europe whatever is universally practicable, significant, and relevant in the history and the present-day tactics of Bolshevism. In Russia today, the connection between leaders, party, class, and masses, as well as the attitude of the dictatorship of the proletariat and its party to the trade unions, are concretely as follows. The dictatorship is exercised by the proletariat organized in the Soviets. The proletariat is guided by the Communist Party of Bolsheviks, which, according to the figures of the latest party congress, April 1920, has a membership of 611,000. The membership varied greatly both before and after the October Revolution and used to be much smaller, even in 1918 and 1919. We are apprehensive of an excessive growth of the party because careerists and charlatans who deserve only to be shot inevitably do all they can to insinuate themselves into the ranks of the ruling party. The last time we opened wide the doors of the party to workers and peasants only was when, in the winter of 1919, Yudenich was within a few versts of Petrograd, and Denikin was in Orel, about 350 versts from Moscow, i.e., when the Soviet Republic was in mortal danger, and when adventurers, careerists, charlatans, and unreliable persons generally could not possibly count on making a profitable career and had more reason to expect the gallows and torture by joining the communists. The party, which holds annual congresses, the most recent on the basis of 1 delegate per 1,000 members, is directed by a central committee of 19 elected at the Congress, while the current work in Moscow has to be carried on by still smaller bodies known as the Organizing Bureau and the Political Bureau, which are elected at plenary meetings of the Central Committee. 5 members of the Central Committee to each bureau. This, it would appear, is a full-fledged oligarchy. No important political or organizational question is decided by any state institution in our republic without the guidance of the party's Central Committee. In its work, the party relies directly on the trade unions, which according to the data of the last Congress, April 1920, now have a membership of over 4 million and are formally non-party. Actually, all the directing bodies of the vast majority of the unions, and primarily, of course, of the All-Russia General Trade Unions, Centro or Bureau, the All-Russia Central Council of Trade Unions, are made up of communists and carry out all the directives of the party. Thus, on the whole, we have a formally non-communist, flexible, and relatively wide and very powerful proletarian apparatus by means of which the party is closely linked up with the class and the masses, and by means of which, under the leadership of the party, the class dictatorship is exercised. Without close contacts with the trade unions and without their energetic support and devoted efforts, not only in economic but also in military affairs, it would of course have been impossible for us to govern the country and to maintain the dictatorship for 2.5 months, let alone 2.5 years. In practice, these very close contacts naturally call for highly complex and diversified work in the form of propaganda, agitation, timely and frequent conferences, not only with the leading trade union workers, but with influential trade union workers generally. They call for a determined struggle against the Mensheviks, who still have a certain, though very small, following to whom they teach all kinds of counter-revolutionary machinations, ranging from an ideological defense of bourgeois democracy and the preaching that the trade union should be, quote, independent of proletarian state power, the sabotage of proletarian discipline, etc., etc. We consider that contacts with the masses through the trade unions are not enough. In the course of our revolution, practical activities have given rise to such institutions as non-party workers and peasant conferences, and we strive by every means to support, develop, and extend this institution in order to be able to observe the temper of the masses, come closer to them, meet their requirements, promote the best among them to state posts, etc., under a recent decree on the transformation of the People's Commissariat of State Control into the Workers' and Peasants' Inspection. Non-party conferences of this kind have been empowered to select members of the state control to carry out various kinds of investigations, etc. Then, of course, all the work of the party is carried on through the Soviets, which embrace the working masses irrespective of occupation. The district congresses of Soviets are democratic institutions, the like of which even the best of the democratic republics of the bourgeois would have never known. Through these congresses, whose proceedings the party endeavors to follow with the closest attention, as well as by continually appointing class-conscious workers to various posts in the rural districts, the proletariat exercises its role of leader to the peasantry, gives effect to the dictatorship of the urban proletariat, wages a systematic struggle against the rich bourgeois, exploiting and profiteering peasantry, etc. Such is the general mechanism of the proletarian state power viewed from above, from the standpoint of the practical implementation of the dictatorship. We hope that the reader will understand why the Russian Bolshevik, who has known the mechanism for 25 years and has seen it develop out of small, illegal, and underground circles, cannot help regarding all this talk about, quote, from above or, quote, from below, about the dictatorship of leaders or the dictatorship of the masses, etc., as ridiculous and childish nonsense. Something like discussing whether a man's left leg or right arm is of greater use to him. We cannot but regard as equally ridiculous and childish nonsense the pompous, very learned, and frightfully revolutionary disquisitions of the German lefts to the effect that communists cannot and should not work in reactionary trade unions, that it is permissible to turn down such work, that it is necessary to withdraw from the trade unions and create a brand new and immaculate workers' union, invented by very pleasant and probably for the most part very youthful communists, etc., etc. Capitalism inevitably leaves socialism the legacy. On the one hand, of the old trade and craft distinctions among the workers, distinctions evolved in the course of centuries. On the other hand, trade unions, which only very slowly in the course of years and years, can and will develop into broad industrial unions with less of the craft union about them, embracing entire industries and not only crafts, trades, and occupations, and later proceed through these industrial unions to eliminate the division of labor among people, to educate and school people, give them all-around development and all-around training so that they are able to do everything. Communism is advancing and must advance towards that goal and will reach it, but only after very many years. To attempt and practice today, to anticipate this future result of a fully developed, fully stabilized, and constituted, fully comprehensive and mature communism would be like trying to teach higher mathematics to a child of 4. We can and must begin to build socialism, not with abstract human material or with human material specially prepared by us, but with the human material bequeathed to us by capitalism. True, that is no easy matter, but no other approach to this task is serious enough to warrant discussion. The trade unions were a tremendous step forward for the working class in the early days of capitalist development, inasmuch as they marked a transition from the workers' disunity and helplessness to the rudiments of class organization. When the Revolutionary Party of the Proletariat, the highest form of proletarian class organization, began to take shape, and the party will not merit the name until it learns to weld the leaders into one indivisible whole with the class and the masses. The trade unions inevitably began to reveal certain reactionary features, a certain craft narrow-mindedness, a certain tendency to be non-political, a certain inertness, etc. However, the development of the proletariat did not and could not proceed anywhere in the world otherwise than through the trade unions, through the reciprocal action between them and the party of the working class. The proletariat's conquest of political power is a gigantic step forward for the proletariat as a class. And the party must more than ever, and in a new way, not only in the old, educate and guide the trade unions, at the same time bearing in mind that they are and will long remain an indispensable school of communism, and a preparatory school that trains proletarians to exercise their dictatorship, and an indispensable organization of the workers for the gradual transfers of the management of the whole economic life of the country to the working class, and not the separate trades, and later to all the working people. In the sense mentioned above, a certain reactionism in the trade unions is inevitable under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Not to understand this means a complete failure to understand the fundamental conditions of the transition from capitalism to socialism. It would be egregious folly to fear this reactionism or to try to evade or leap over it, for it would mean fearing that function of the proletarian vanguard, which consists in training, educating, enlightening, and drawing into the new life the most backward strata and masses of the working class and the peasantry. On the other hand, it would be a still graver error to postpone the achievement of the dictatorship of the proletariat until a time where there will not be a single worker with a narrow-minded craft outlook or with craft and craft union prejudices. The art of politics and the communist's correct understanding of his task consists in correctly gauging the conditions in the moment when the vanguard of the proletariat can successfully assume power, when it is able, during and after the seizure of power, to win adequate support from sufficiently broad strata of the working class and of the non-proletarian working masses, and when it is able thereafter to maintain, consolidate, and extend its rule by educating, training, and attracting ever broader masses of the working people. Further, in countries more advanced than Russia, a certain reactionism in the trade unions has been and was bound to be manifested in a far greater measure than in our country. Our Mensheviks found support in the trade unions, and to some extent still do so in a small number of unions. As a result of the latter's craft narrow-mindedness, craft selfishness, and opportunism, the Mensheviks of the West have acquired a much firmer footing in the trade unions. There, the craft union, narrow-minded, selfish, case-hardened, covetous, and petty bourgeois labor aristocracy, imperialist-minded and imperialist-corrupted, has developed into a much stronger section than in our country. That is incontestable. The struggle against the Gomperses and against the Johaus, Hendersons, Merheims, Legions, and company in Western Europe is much more difficult than the struggle against our Mensheviks, who are an absolutely homogeneous social and political type. This struggle must be waged ruthlessly, and it must unfailingly be brought as we brought it, to a point when all the incorrigible leaders of opportunism and social chauvinism are completely discredited and driven out of the trade unions. Political power cannot be captured, and the attempt to capture it should not be made until the struggle has reached a certain stage. This certain stage will be different in different countries and in different circumstances. It can be correctly gauged only by thoughtful, experienced, and knowledgeable political leaders of the proletariat in each particular country. In Russia, the elections to the Constituent Assembly in November 1917, a few days after the Proletarian Revolution of October 25th, 1917, were one of the criteria of the success of this struggle. In these elections, the Mensheviks were utterly defeated. They received 700,000 votes, 1,400,000 if the vote in Transcaucasia is added, as against 9 million votes polled by the Bolsheviks. See my article, the Constituent Assembly Elections and the Dictatorship of the Proletariat, in the Communist International, number 7 through 8. We are waging a struggle against the labor aristocracy in the name of the masses, of the workers. In order to win them over to our side, we are waging the struggle against the opportunist and social chauvinist leaders in order to win the working class over to our side. It would be absurd to forget this most elementary and most self-evident truth. Yet, it is this very absurdity that the German left communists perpetrate when, because of the reactionary and counter-revolutionary character of the trade union, top leadership, they jump to the conclusion that we must withdraw from the trade unions, refuse to work in them, and create new and artificial forms of labor organization. This is so unpardonable, a blunder, that it is tantamount to the greatest service communists could render the bourgeoisie. Like all the opportunist, social chauvinists, and Kautskyite trade union leaders, our Mensheviks are nothing but agents of the bourgeoisie in the working class movement. Democrats. As we have always said the Mensheviks are, or labor lieutenants of the capitalist class, to use the splendid and profoundly true expression of the followers of Daniel de Leon in America. To refuse to work in the reactionary trade unions means leaving the insufficiently developed or backward masses of workers under the influence of the reactionary leaders, the agents of the bourgeoisie, the labor aristocrats, or workers who have become completely bourgeois. C.F. Ingalls' letter to Marx in 1858 about the British workers. This ridiculous theory that communists should not work in reactionary trade unions reveals with the utmost clarity the frivolous attitude of the left communists towards the question of influencing the masses and their misuse of clamor about the masses, in quotes. If you want to help the masses and win sympathy and support of the masses, you should not fear difficulties or pinpricks, chicanery, insults, and persecution from the, quote, leaders, who being opportunists and social chauvinists, who in most cases directly or indirectly connected with the bourgeoisie and the police, but must absolutely work wherever the masses are to be found. You must be capable of any sacrifice of overcoming the greatest obstacles in order to carry on agitation and propaganda systematically, perseveringly, persistently, and patiently in those institutions, societies, and associations, even the most reactionary, in which proletarian or semi-proletarian masses are to be found. The trade unions and the workers' cooperatives, the latter sometimes at least, are the very organizations in which the masses are to be found. According to figures quoted in the Swedish paper Folkets Dagblad Politiken of March 10, 1920, the trade union membership in Great Britain increased from 5,500,000 at the end of 1917 to 6,600,000 at the end of 1918, an increase of 19% towards the close of 1919. The membership was estimated at 7,500,000. I have not got the corresponding figures for France and Germany to hand, but absolutely incontestable and generally known facts testify to a rapid rise in the trade union membership in these countries too. These facts make crystal clear something that is confirmed by thousands of other symptoms, namely that class consciousness and the desire for organization are growing among the proletarian masses, among the rank and file, among the backward elements. Millions of workers in Great Britain, France, and Germany are for the first time passing from a complete lack of organization to the elementary, lowest, simplest, into those still thoroughly imbued with bourgeois democratic prejudice, most easily comprehensible form of organization, namely the trade unions, yet the revolutionary but imprudent left communists stand by, crying out, the masses, but refusing to work within the trade unions on the pretext that they are reactionary, and invent a brand new immaculate little workers' union, which is guiltless of bourgeois democratic prejudices and innocent of craft or narrow-minded craft union sins. A union which they claim will be a broad organization. Recognition of the Soviet system and dictatorship will be the only condition of membership. See the passage quoted above. It would be hard to imagine any greater ineptitude or greater harm to the revolution than that caused by the left revolutionaries. Why, if we in Russia today, after 2.5 years of unprecedented victories over the bourgeoisie of Russia and the Entente were to make recognition of the dictatorship a condition of trade union membership, would be doing a very foolish thing, damaging our influence among the masses and helping the Mensheviks. The task devolving on communists is to convince the backward elements to work among them and not to fence themselves off from them with artificial and childishly left slogans. There can be no doubt that the Gomperses, the Hendersons, the John Hawks, and the Legions are very grateful to those left revolutionaries who, like the German opposition on principle, heaven preserve us from such principles, or like some of the revolutionaries in the American industrial workers of the world, advocate quitting the reactionary trade unions and refusing to work in them. Those men, the leaders of opportunism, will no doubt resort to every device of bourgeois diplomacy and to the aid of the bourgeois governments, the clergy, the police, and the courts to keep communists out of the trade unions. Oust them by every means. Make their work in the trade unions as unpleasant as possible, and insult, bait, and persecute them. We must be able to stand up to all this, agree to make any sacrifice, and even if need be, to resort to various stratagems, artifices, and illegal methods, to evasions and subterfuges, as long as we get into the trade unions, remain in them, and carry on communist work within them at all costs. Under Tsarism, we had no legal opportunities whatsoever until 1905. However, when Zubatov, agent of the secret police, organized black hundred workers, assemblies, and working men's society for the purpose of trapping revolutionaries and combating them, we sent members of our party to these assemblies and into these societies. I personally remember one of them, Comrade Babushkin, a leading St. Petersburg factory worker, shot by order of the Tsar's general in 1906. They established contacts with the masses, were able to carry on their agitation, and succeeded in wresting workers from the influence of Zubatov's agents. Of course, in Western Europe, which is imbued with the most deep-rooted legalistic, constitutionalist, and bourgeois democratic prejudices, this is more difficult of achievement. However, it can and must be carried out, and systematically at that. The Executive Committee of the Third International must, in my opinion, positively condemn and call upon the next Congress of the Communist International to condemn both policy of refusing to work in reactionary trade unions in general, explaining in detail why such refusal is unwise and what extreme harm it does to the cause of the proletarian revolution, and in particular, the line of conduct of some members of the Communist Party of Holland, who, whether directly or indirectly, overtly or covertly, wholly or partly, it does not matter, have supported this erroneous policy. The Third International must break with the tactics of the Second International. It must not evade or play down points at issue, but must pose them in a straightforward fashion. The whole truth has been put squarely on the independents. The whole truth must likewise be put squarely to the left communists. Okay, that was a good read. It's pretty good. Very revealing. And I think this is kind of, it's a good direction, because this is a question that we're at here in, the United States, I feel like, where we come from we live on land that is here because of massive genocide, like everybody here lives on that land, whether they were the inheritance of the trauma of that genocide, or the wealth of that genocide, or the opportunity of that genocide that came with it, So this is kind of raised up certain questions, like with me, and how it applies to the United States. And a lot of it is that, hey, and there's the reality thing. I sometimes feel like we're going to have to give up on the idea of teaching everybody to be moral and teaching everybody to be, quote, leftists, We're going to have to give up on that, because as soon as we get one person, the state's going to do something that causes trauma to so many other people that they're just not going to be able to, because they have to survive. They're not going to be able to focus on their own moral character. They all have kids, and they're raising those kids. And if they're having to always work all the time and not get anything and not have anything to themselves and just barely get enough to feed their kids and take care of their kids, they're going to say, hey, at least I'm feeding my kid. And I can't tell you how many children in the United States have that kind of a childhood, where it's like, verbal abuse, trauma, and things like that don't really count, because the parent dedicates everything, and the child would die without that parent, because that's how barbaric the United States is in 2021. It may not be like the Tsar in Russia. But it's definitely, I don't even know if it was Eastern or Western Europe, and but it's as of today in 2021, it's the most barbaric. That children will be left out. Victims of abuse are stuck in conditions where they have to be there. There's no health. If you get injured, you're paying off debt for the rest of your life. These are things that we're never going to be able to preach morality to. Look at how much the leftists, how much they believe in intersects with Christianity, and how much it doesn't. But what it does, it's like these people, it's the kind of stuff you heard from Christians growing up. And did that work? No. Not all of it. A lot of it's not focused on. But I also particularly think of the racial issue. That's one thing that's particularly unique here. Is that whereas there were racial issues, I'm sure, in Russia, it was just something I need to look at, I guess, basically. It was Lenin always combated racial division. He spoke out against the Tsar when the Tsar was trying to make just Jewish schools for Jewish children. I thought, well, in the U.S., we had segregation up until like the 60s, And there it was like the Tsar was about to be was about to segregate the Jews out. And he's like, that's what Lenin said. Don't, look at how they're dividing the proletariat and while they all do business with each other. That's basically what he was saying about the bourgeois, So these certain conditions, some reactionary stuff is there's a certain element of racism in the United States that's not like anywhere else. It's violent, it's dangerous. And during these times, the U.S. was entirely, it wouldn't have been an option. The things that Lenin was able to stop in Russia from happening had been going on here and just kept going on and kept going on. It was able to stop before they kind of took off even, But, I'm not sure if the whole, into serfdom throughout the 1800s might have been a different story in Russia, but, the United States has its own historical struggle. Nevertheless, though, let's look at what, worked in Russia. Let's consider its historical conditions. And because it is history, because it is reality, then it is scientific and can be applied in such ways, It's like you test, certain medicines on mammals, has a certain effect. Well, we know that those genetics are the same way with humans, right? Now, it's different this is human nature. Now, it's no longer mammal nature, it's human nature. Between, people in the U.S. in 2021, and people in Russia in the very earliest turn of the century in the 1900s. It's but the conditions are still slightly different, So we apply it to what we do know from it, I guess, Anyway, y'all hit me up. It's Marxist Saw, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, TikTok, YouTube, Medium. Been writing stuff, posting videos. Y'all hit me up. Y'all want to work with me or something? Y'all want to read stuff, whatever. But if y'all just want to talk about things, hit me up. Please do. I'm always down. And y'all have a great day. And Dodala Goi.